I'll be honest. In the past, I felt like a black sheep. I didn't fit anywhere. Yeah, I think a lot of people who work in the creative space can probably relate to it a lot. You kind of have these quirky, novel ideas, and most people think you're strange for having them. You're pretty odd.
Welcome to the Run and Gun podcast with Sam and Aryan. We're trying to help businesses grow using social media and using just the equipment and knowledge they have. So ultimately, you don't need us. Join us as we welcome guests from all over the creative field to supply value to you, and hopefully you can learn something along the way. Let's get into it. Welcome to the Run and Gun podcast, episode 1. We'd like to welcome our very special friend, Mr. Jude.
Hello, everybody.
Who is the first guest on the Run and Gun podcast.
Woo!
How exciting is that?
That's exciting for me. I was going to say something wrong there. I shall refrain.
No, say it.
No, it's really cool. It's exciting. I've got to work with you and to see you put this together and actually get to meet Aryan. It's really exciting to shoot the shit, talk about creative things, and just see if we can have useful dialogue, have the chin wags, and come up something valuable.
Love it, man.
That's all we need, value.
Grateful to have you on, man. It's honestly, it's such a pleasure and it's such an honor to have you be our first guest here.
Mm-hmm.
So in just a couple short words, like who are you? What do you do? Give us a little bit of a backstory.
Yeah, so I was saying a little bit in the back there, I consider myself a bit of a creative kid. I got a little personal story with that, which I was about to allude to. So when I was a 2 to 3 year old, I ended up in the paper for drawing photo kind of realistic people with irises and eyelashes and things. And my mum's nurse at the time, she said, this is not normal. So that was kind of my sort of foray into the creative field. I studied graphic design in 2009, and I also studied first year of architecture in 2013, but didn't quite finish those studies and moved here to the beautiful Sunset Coast of West Australia.
Wow.
What drove you to WA? Was there anything specific about it?
The reason I came to Australia was for family reasons. We'll see how we edit it, but I'll be natural. Yeah, we came to Australia. My son was living here with his mum at the time. We had parted. And then I finished my first year of architecture studies to come here. And then pretty much in 2014, I think it was, I was living a single dad life. When I came here, man, I had no license, no money, just started from the bottom, went into the coffee world because I used to do a little bit of barista work in New Zealand, and kind of that was my first year coming into Australia.
Oh, okay, wow. Well, thanks for sharing that with us, man. Thank you.
So why did you pick Perth and not another city?
The boy was already here in Perth, but so a lot of Māoris like me, a lot of Kiwis, they come over here for the Australian dream. Right. So there's the mining industry, and a lot of Kiwis come over here to pursue that. And so my son was already here with his mother at the time, and that's kind of what brought me here.
Mm-hmm.
So it's mostly circumstantial, I'd say.
And the good beer helps you stick around, right?
The beer is why I'm still here and why I've gotten bigger, a beer belly.
So this episode is about branding, and you are a beautiful brand strategist. Am I right in saying that?
Yeah.
I'll claim the brand strategist.
Let's reiterate that. A thing or two about branding.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this whole episode is us going into a deep dive to sort of pick your brain a little bit, and also for the viewers and also people listening as well, to just go through and see what are business owners doing, and hopefully they can take something away to implement into their brand. So the really cool thing is you and Aryan are brand people, so maybe you could chin wag with each other. I'll mute your mics if you want while you're doing that. So, Jude, let's deep dive. So I want you to tell us a little bit about the business that you do, how you got into that business, and just kind of unpack it for us a little bit.
Especially because you told us about Perth, how you got here. But then how did you get into the creative industry? Because you said you did a bit of architecture and then a bit of coffee, bit of barista, and then how did that start?
Yeah, I think one of the clearest bridges between, my happenstance life where I was a single dad working in the coffee industry, there is some element of creativity in the coffee space. You might find a lot of baristas are actually graphic designers. They've studied something, but maybe don't have the confidence in the business area of that. They might do a couple of jobs here and there. And so for me, it was 5 years in coffee, and even the creativity. I started doing coffee consulting, helping to streamline processes, do barista training.
Okay.
One of the reasons for that, because I was managing one of the highest earning McCafes in WA, which is actually a Baldivis branch. There was one McCafe that used to kick our butts, who was in a mining town up north. It's probably the only coffee they could get that had drive-through. So they used to beat us. And then when I discovered these, and speaking of brand, like when I discovered this little quirky crew of specialty coffee roasters, these guys with weird mustaches and tattoos, I was like, I want to get into that part of the coffee world. So I did that. I made some good friends. Little shout out to Froth and Coffee in Mandurah. We're allowed to do a little plug. So that's a good buddy of mine. He has this unique wood-fired coffee roasting business in Mandurah. Started to connect with these guys, and what I quickly learned from what McDonald's does and what these sort of grassroots small business specialty coffee roasters do is they didn't have a lot of the systems to train young people, to maintain those young people. And so I wanted to kind of build a bridge between those two. So the coffee world, I was still expressing a lot of my sort of creative tendencies, as if you will. Went into consultancy, and then with consultancy, people would ask, can you do our branding for a cafe? How do we order 10,000 cups with our branding on it? I started going back into my past, which was graphic design originally, and started to kind of straddle both those worlds at the time.
Wow. Well, that's in depth. How did you find transitioning from coffee into full-time branding?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I was doing barista training down in Mandurah, then up in Kalamunda, and that's when this particular cafe was like, we need to brand these cups, and they need to be done because, when you're doing these large orders from China, they had to be within a certain time frame. Now, for me, it had actually been a while since I'd done any graphic design, and the only tool I had left was my iPad Pro and an Apple Pencil. So I was just like sketching these things, vectorizing them, and getting it done. And then the nonprofit that this cafe belonged to, as I was working and volunteering for them, I wasn't making any money for some of the stages as well. They offered me the opportunity to become marketing and communications manager. And so that's kind of how I cut my teeth and sort of was re-invited back into that creative world.
Okay. So it's just preparation meets like opportunity kind of thing.
Yeah, pretty much.
Do you think that was a case of right place, right time? Or do you think that was, I'm going to say someone who definitely saw the talent that you had and kind of grabbed you to take it?
I think it was a combination of those things. So I'm a faith-based dude. And in that time, there was a couple of actions I took. One was leaving the cafe I was working at to pursue this thing. Now, the crazy story was I was at home and in a sort of prayerful state, you could call it. I was kind of at a crossroads wondering what I want to do with my life. Some of the plans and ideas that I had with this previous cafe wasn't quite working out. And so I was like kind of praying about that. And then I felt this feeling to just write my resignation and hand that in. And there was no income. I still have a son and a family. So I was like, I don't know if that's a good thing. But with a leap of faith, I took that leap. So I write the resignation letter. I take it to the cafe. I did a shift there. Then I walked the foreshore, like sort of contemplating what I'm about to do. Like, this is crazy. I'm listening to this voice and I'm just going to give this thing a go. I went back to the cafe and the boss at the time was like, don't tell me you're here to resign. And that was the most sort of jaw-dropping, awkward moment where I pull out a piece of paper and say, I actually am. And so I hand that to her. She was teary-eyed because, in the coffee world, it's quite hard. There's a lot of churn and, a lot of people are quite young as baristas, and it's hard to just have someone who's solid. So I did that. And when I left that cafe, I literally walked out that front door feeling like, oh, crap. I walked across the road and then I get a phone call. My phone starts vibrating. I answer this call. I don't know who it was. And it was a lady called Claire who works actually for the Shire, for the council. And she said, hey, Jude, by any chance, do you do barista training? Which was what I was trying to do with these cafes, build some kind of regular barista training academy after hours. So all cafes close around 3 p.m., right? I thought that's like a little opportunity there if they get reset up to do barista training for youth. and it wasn't working out. So as soon as I resigned, my phone literally goes off as I leave that cafe, and I get asked to do barista training for aquatic center. And then I also get a phone call like a few days after that one if I can go do barista training for this non-profit up in Kalamunda. So it was one of the trippiest times. And at the same time, I was a little bit like praying about wanting to do something marketing, wanting to learn what that was, wanting to do something digital. I was kind of playing around with some of those things, but wasn't taking it seriously. And then when the marketing communications job offer came, it was in a way not surprising, because that was that prayerful state that I was in. That was the communication that I was kind of having at the time.
So that led to you teaching, did you start an academy in the end, or?
No, I actually bought the business name. You know, when you're starting off and you're like, I'll pay for the business name.
Yeah.
And so I went through that. It was called the Underground Barista Academy. You could probably look it up under the ABN. And Underground, that was actually inspired by this cafe I used to love over in New Zealand, which was called Underground. It's a play on words because you grind coffee. Coffee is ground, the underground. And I like the whole underground vibes. So I named it. I was doing a bit of it at that capacity, but then once this opportunity came along, I thought, let's do this.
Mm.
I'd say one of the beautiful things when I was doing some barista training, and some of these are transferable skills into marketing, and even like when I've worked for companies internally, the things I learned in the coffee world have heavily transferred to understanding of operations inside organizations. So things such as inputs, outputs, methods such as Lean Six Sigma, Lean Agile. Because if you think about it, people come and they line up, they order a coffee, and you're trying to punch that out at high quality, like repeatedly for 8 hours, 10 hours. And I could abstract those ideas and see that it was still true for things such as companies needing to punch out their content media. How do they do it in such a way that it actually is targeted? They first have to understand who they're serving, which is quite a lot of the things I learned in cafes. So I don't know, what was the first question?
The question was just, how did you get your calling? Like, I think you're explaining it pretty well.
The calling?
Yeah, you're calling into what you do.
Yeah, it was like you said, it was that kind of, I'll be honest, in the past, I felt like a black sheep. I didn't fit anywhere. Yeah, I think a lot of people who work in the creative space can probably relate to it a lot. You kind of have these quirky, novel ideas, and most people think you're strange for having them. You know, you're pretty odd. There's only been 1 or 2 times where I found a home for that. So the first time that I experienced that was in architecture studies. A lot of our assignments, we had to create and design something, and then we'd put it out to public, and random people walking around through the college would vote with sticky notes. And I actually won a lot of those competitions at the time. And I remember calling my mum and saying, "How I think I finally found a home for my daydreams." Because I used to get in trouble for daydreaming in class. My grandfather's a mathematician. I used to be in his class, man. And so I'm from New Zealand, and he's an old Māori guy. So it's like some of the language you'd hear in the classroom was something like, if you've seen the movie Boy by Taika Waititi, it's kind of a little bit rugged like that. So I used to always get in trouble for having these daydreams. And then I found that because of the way my brain works, they're actually of value to specific kinds of organizations or people. So that was one of the ways I found my way.
It's very relatable to me as well.
Yeah.
It's just typical like sciences and whatnot. They just don't make sense in our heads compared to this creative side.
Yeah.
It's unexplainable unless you just make that thing happen in the real world.
It's so true. And I think that the world, they kind of like a particular way of things being done. It's like, don't fix it if it's not broken, or this is the way we've always done something. And therefore the new and novel creative ideas, which I don't know about your experience, but for me, it's been like when you've watched one cartoon and then I went with my grandfather who played golf, all these strange experiences start to sort of percolate and come up with different outcomes in your brain. Like, if I merge this thing with that thing, this could be really, really cool.
Yeah.
the key, I think, is for creatives and people to find how to help businesses who need that. And I think that's the key.
They need to help themselves as well.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the times they delve into that like dream state, but the reality is you need to make money out of it as well and also sustain yourself.
Yeah, that's a massive part of it. Hey,
it's forgotten. Yeah.
So we're going to go through this segment first is called Understanding Brand Strategy. Okay. So it's essentially just going through and figuring out how do you define what a brand strategy is, and asking Jude if you can walk us through a couple examples, and even like seeing you two pick your brains together and kind of like butt heads and kind of answer the questions too would be great. So Mr. Jude, how do you define a brand's positioning strategy, and sort of what steps do you take to ensure that matches to the correct audience?
Okay, let's unpack it. How do you understand a brand's positioning strategy? There's a few steps in that. The first, and if anybody looks this up and you do your own research, when you start looking at brand, there's a couple of godfathers of brand, such as Marty Neumeier, who wrote a book called The Brand Gap. Zag, do you remember the name of this book? Zag, hold on. Zag, if everyone's Zig, or if everyone zags. Oh, well, I'm gonna have to come back.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
He's a godfather of brand. And there's another guy called Paul Hanlon who wrote another book called Primal Branding. What these guys discovered in kind of like the 80s, to understand brand positioning strategy, we need to first understand brand. And the way some of these godfathers of brand have kind of popularized it or simplified the idea is that brand is a gut feeling about either a person, a product, or a service. So you have a gut feeling. That means it lives somewhere in the realm of emotion. It's in the invisible space that people hold in their minds. Positioning is where that brand lives. So, for example, if I said to you, hey, we need to build a dog kennel by hand. That's what we want to do. What's the first shop you think about going
Bunnings.
to? Bunnings. What's the second shop you think about going to?
Pet Barn.
Oh, you got an answer. That's pretty good. Maybe it was because of the dog kennel. So brand positioning is that there is already a preordained answer in your head, and Bunnings owns that real estate in your mind. Well, I would ask the audience, would you love to own real estate in the minds of people for a product or service you have? I think the answer is yes.
Yeah.
So brand is the feeling and emotions that people can have, the associations they have with a product or a service or a person. And when you lock that into a part of their brain, it can stay there. And it means that often, sometimes there's not even a second option against that. Sometimes when I use the Bunnings example, people can't think of the second one. It's just so strong. They have to spend time to think, oh, maybe might attend, but I don't even know if that exists anymore. That's how strong positioning is.
Mm-hmm.
The strategy component can be a little bit tricky. What it looks and feels like is workshops with a whiteboard and getting all the decision makers together in one room so that our job as the facilitator is to help extract insights and truths about the brand and lay it out in such a way that when you go to position your brand, your company, your service, strategy should help it win in a specific playing field.
Right.
So it's kind of like you could read a book like David and Goliath, I think by Malcolm Gladwell. Some people will say, oh, we're too small. That's why it's hard to compete against. Let's use schools. Oh, our school's too small. There's nothing that we can really say that's our strength. Well, your strength is that you're still small enough to care about every individual child. Let's tell stories around that. Let's create content around that. And that is true. So strategy is that ability to kind of find your blue ocean, or what is the advantage of what you think is a disadvantage.
That kind of goes back to a video that we made about using your strengths and what makes you original and your individuality as your leverage on social media, right? That's a really powerful. Thank you for that.
Yeah, that's my little breakdown. Put on the spot. It's
breakdown. Oh, hip hop breakdown.
Yeah. Okay. And Jeff Bezos also said that a brand, like you were talking about gut feeling, a brand is what people say behind closed doors about you.
Yes.
And whatever the first thing that comes up is who you're known for. So what are you known for by your friends? You know, behind closed doors, what do you think?
being the best beer pong player you'll ever see.
So if you're branding it like that,
I need to see this put to the test now.
Oh, now we're on the pressure.
My brand for you is different. Like the professional who does everything like well, I guess. So,
Okay.
and then same with Jude. Jude, I've seen your Instagram page. Your brand is like, because it's orange. I always associate orange with like fun, easy to talk to, professional as well. Because I just saw that. I saw a board with all your sticky notes on it. Just know you're doing work. You're getting stuff done, making it as simple as possible for people to understand what you do and how you help them.
That's good. Nailed it. Aryan's nailed it.
Yeah.
What was your foray into sort of brand strategy?
Brands, it was because I was doing it for so many product businesses, and I realized that those skills are so applicable to all sorts of things, even your personal brand. And it really just came through with Instagram stories, actually, because whatever I posted on there, people really like recognized me and then wanted to get advice from me about entrepreneurship and design.
That's cool.
That's what led me into this.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's honest. Okay. Could you talk us through the process of developing a brand strategy?
Developing a brand strategy.
What's the first step?
Yeah.
Actually, can I add to that? Not just what's the first step to developing a brand strategy, but why should you have a brand strategy?
That's a good question. I think we'll start with that one. And I think it sort of segues into what I was saying about before. If you want to stand out and hold a position in the minds of your ideal target audience or the people who you like to hang out with and serve, then these frameworks help you do that. And I actually heard a friend of mine, he did a post on LinkedIn. His name is Brandon Triola. He wrote a post saying, and this resonated so well with me, that the idea of doing brand strategy, you should look at it more the same way that organizations go to an IT company to say, hey, we need to do some digital transformation here. We need to start to bring in CRMs. We need to start to create all these things. And when you think about IT companies, some of these digital transformations can take 12 months. So it's actually the things that you do from beginning through to the end, and there's no real end. You can just always improve, or you can re-strategize. Maybe you can look at a new market, but it looks something like the digital transformation process that IT companies go through, except we're dealing with things starting from the invisible, which is the emotions. What emotions should people have when thinking about us, or the positioning we have in their mind? And then slowly, once you understand what those are with your team, there's another critical part. You have to have the key stakeholders in the room. If you have 8 of 9 board members and the 9th one says, if there's one key stakeholder that's not in the room, it can really be a huge challenge for the organization. So that would be one of the first steps, is to ensure that the right people are in the room, and then go through that process. How do we take these invisible things such as emotions and how people feel, and how do we express that through visible, tangible things such as your content, media, videos, even the way people answer a phone?
And you said in the question, why is it important?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you lose your way a lot if you don't have the brand strategy and you're always going left and right. You never know the right direction. You never know the right direction of where you want to be going with your business, or even your personal brand. And this just is like a roadmap in a way, just to get to where you want to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I like that you brought that up, Aryan, because it's kind of that reversing it. What does it look like when you don't have the brand strategy? And if organizations resonate with this, they'll feel themselves that they can't agree. Perhaps the leader keeps changing the goalposts for the team, and it causes frustration. Without that agreed upon insights from inside the leaders, documented in a document that they can all point to and say, this is what we agreed on. It's kind of like a contract almost. They'll be lost in the desert for 40 years. That's a biblical reference.
That's it. Yeah.
So the biggest project I just wrapped up was helping a school, help them to rebrand, and it was the production of a logo. And so one of the very first things I do, not just with executive teams, board members, and all staff, is to start to sort of plant seeds in the mind that help them understand that logo is not the brand, that it's so much broader. It's all the invisible things such as the feelings and the attributes that help express itself in the visuals. The importance of why organizations need to know it's not just a logo is because it will determine how they hire to solve a certain problem. So if they want to solve a brand positioning problem, but they hire someone who's just a graphic designer, they still might not achieve the brand position that they want because they're stuck thinking it's only the visuals. So I have a really handy framework when I do workshops. It's called the brand pyramid. You could probably Google it. It's just a triangle that says from the bottom of this triangle, it's broken into 4 slices. At the bottom, you have what's called the invisible attributes. I like to call it the spirit or the essence of a thing. What's that famous old Aussie movie? It's the essence of the thing. Oh man, these guys are too young.
No,
it's a classic.
You got me on the spot.
Castle.
The Castle.
Yeah, the castle. It's the essence of the thing.
Right.
Okay. So our job is kind of helping to discover what is the essence of the thing. When there's multiple staff members and stakeholders in the leadership team, it's actually the aggregate of all of them combined into one. So think of Power Rangers, when the Power Rangers used to combine and become that one giant robot that defeats the enemy at the end. When you're talking about a brand of an organization that has multiple leaders, it's that aggregate invisible stuff come together. I've lost track.
No, I 100% understand where you're coming from. That's beyond logo. It's beyond anything even physical. It's all just psychological, branding, I guess.
Yeah.
This reminded me of this example my dad gave where he works at BHP, and he said if you jaywalk in the city, you get fired the next day. And if someone sees you jaywalking from BHP, and that might be a company policy, but it actually goes back to branding, which is we don't do stuff that's not right in society. And that's just like a very niche version of what branding is like.
That's a great example, because to be the person who thought it was okay to jaywalk means that you have a set of beliefs and values. And what the company is saying is those values and beliefs don't align with who we are. Yeah, that's awesome.
Hey, just really quick, thank you again for listening to the podcast. If you're enjoying it so far, make sure to leave it a like and give us a rating here on Spotify. And also, you can watch the long-form version over on YouTube, which has the cameras, might I add. If you want to connect with us, we're on LinkedIn, and also give us a follow on social media like Instagram and Facebook, and also check out our website. All right, we're not going to take too much of your time. Your time is valuable. Let's get back into it. Thanks. We're going to move into creating brand identity, right? Which I think is a really huge thing, and helping to help businesses establish a unique tone of voice and personality for their brand. My question around that is, how can brand help the business owner know exactly how to communicate with their prospects and their audiences and speak the way the brand should on a regular basis so that nothing ever gets changed? I think that might have been a little bit of gibberish, but can you provide examples while going through it on how different brands have effectively differentiated themselves through this communication style?
Yeah, I'd say the first thing that you said was, how can the business owners know exactly what the right look and feel, tone of voice is? The real truth to that is always with data and analytics. You're going to be creating some creatives, so whether that's ad creative, and you're going to put that out to the market, and you're going to look at the analytics to see what resonates more. If you're already a really strongly established brand, you might have already done those tests over, like, say, 30, 40, 50 years, like someone like Nike or someone like Harley Davidson, right? So they exactly know for sure. And even if the market changes, right, there's a pocket, a position that they own. So first, you probably need to do a bunch of tests. But secondly, the framework that you would need to have in order to do branding that I call it brand on point and targeted. So you'd have to have a deep understanding on who you serve, and you'd have to have a deep understanding of who you are. And the marriage between those two things is what helps to start to develop some of these physically expressed things, such as ad creative, copywriting, all of this kind of stuff. So just like I was saying, we use this really handy tool. It's called the brand pyramid. At the bottom of the pyramid, you've got what we call the invisible aspects. So the brand pyramid, at the bottom of it are the invisible things I sometimes call the spirit or the essence of the thing. The next layer above that are the actions and behaviors that the brand does. And the third one after that is the tone of voice. And the last one, the very tip top of the iceberg, is your look and feel. Now, everything that's on top, the top layers, they have some reliance on the foundational parts underneath it. And all of it is underpinned by your values, your beliefs at the bottom. That's the invisible. So you need to have an understanding of your values, your beliefs, your principles, some of these cultural aspects. And then how do those express itself in your actions and behaviors? It's kind of like your story about at BHP, if you go jaywalking, if you're a staff member and you jaywalk from the headquarters across the road, that could be something like an instant dismissal. The question is why? The reason is because that action and that behavior did not align with the underpinning thing, which might be something like safety first, for example. And you just did something that was not safe. And so that could be cause for instant dismissal. So a little clause there. I'm not representing BHP. I don't know what your laws and your policies are, but that was just a little narrative way to explain how do the values then express itself in behaviors and actions. Next is your tone of voice. Now, business owners might be asking me, but practically, Jude, how do we do it? What it looks like is you sit down and you write these things down. You write down your values and beliefs. Then you write down your action, you write down your behaviors, your actions, the benefits, the features of yourself, of your brand, of your company, your service, your product. Then next, you start to write tone of voice. Now, if one of your values and beliefs is we are the baddest, I was just thinking of UFC fighters, for example. If the business was a person, it's like this beautiful woman who's maybe like mid-30s to mid-40s. She's wearing that kind of natural material white dress. She's in a black and white photo walking the ocean. You can tell she eats avocados and that kind of healthy, stuff. This is one of the exercises we do. This is called a brand persona. And she gives this kind of motherly, sagely wise advice. That was one of the brand things that they had missing. So the communications and the content used to be like straightforward business. Hey, we've got this, massages, it's on special, come get it. So then once we started to use this tone of voice, we were able to help 11x sales for them because it was just like on brand, on point. And that's one of the ways you can help them make sure their tone of voice is right. And you do the same thing for look and feel. Once you have your look and feel attributes written down, you get your team of designers and creatives who start aiming at that. Now, in the actual process of being in a creative house, sometimes it looks like research. You're looking up brands that have that particular look and feel. So if your look and feel might be, let's say, a bubble tea company, but for CEOs. Let's just come up, we're just making up a business right now. Maybe we'd go launch it. So it needs to be kind of maybe the pain point is that they're always stressed, but they like to have a certain high status. So you're going to look for fonts, colors, textures, patterns that resonate with that kind of target audience so that you can express the brand correctly.
Okay.
So that was a long-winded one, man.
Powerful answer. No, powerful answer.
With the pyramid, do you have to do it from the bottom up? What order can you do it?
That's a good question. Man, that's a really good question. These are the deep philosophical things I've thought about as I've worked with client to client. Do you have an answer?
Well, with clients I've worked with, they always want to start at the top because they want that visual. They want a product there that they've paid for, instant like gratification. But then when I start with the beliefs and attributes and things like that, they kind of fall asleep in a way because they just don't think like that. And that's a lot of the branding. I do put that in like module 1. You have to do that, but it's difficult to get that point across.
It's a real challenge, hey? You either have to show case studies or us ourselves as we grow and develop our brands that people just have massive trust. And we say, just the way people trust a doctor. If you have bad news with your health and there may be a 6-month process to help heal you, you're going to follow that advice. And I think sometimes it's a positioning on our part and growth and learning to help ensure that we are those trusted people that can help them go on that journey. Same with, that's why I love the IT example, where IT go on a digital transformation journey. It's going to take 12 months. It's going to be like 5 milestones, and we've got to do all these things. We have to help the right lead who understands like that's what we have to do to compete. There's a bit of responsibility on our part, I think, but it is tricky. So going back to the coffee experience, I was going to say, every person who wants to learn to be a barista, I'll ask them why and things. They always want to do latte art. And unfortunately for them, I'm like, first, I'm going to help you pull perfect espressos and shots, and we're not going to stop until you're bored, bleeding out of your eyes. Because you got to build those strong foundations.
Yep.
So there's a principle to it.
Do you ever let them do the latte art though?
That's a good question. I'll let them have a little play when it gets quiet.
Okay.
Oh, the cafe's quiet now. Jude, can I make my own latte art for my coffee? Sure. It's usually an almond latte or something, I'm sure.
Let's talk a little bit about like brand awareness, right? So what are some innovative strategies that brands can use to reach their new audience, but also maintain, as you've sort of said at the beginning, maintain that real estate in their mind?
I think there's some creative ways to do it. So I've got one client, customer, prospect, some beautiful people who are looking to engage me for services. They have quite a limited budget. So I even coming up with this solution, I went and asked a bunch of guys who work in a similar space for this particular people, and I said, hey, if you had this amount of money, what would you do? And some of these guys said, well, if you develop things like if you do your teardrop banners and you've got your gazebos branded and you do these things for the events that we would run, you can have repeat usage of those things at events, and then you take photos of your staff near those touch points, like at a gazebo, people lining up to sign up and get the lanyards and things like that. You can repeat use those gazebos and those teardrop banners and repeatedly take photos of that whole scenario, the event itself, and then post that on social media. Now, that was quite a cool creative answer from someone who actually works on the ground in that kind of industry. And my experience doing more digital marketing was more like, let's run ads. It's like the easiest answer. We can do digital creative. You can work with people overseas and collaborate, build some ad creative, and then you can do A/B testing to see what works. So in some ways, depending on your situation, maybe you could do both. Maybe you could pick one of those. I think it would really depend on what you're trying to do.
Okay. Why is it important to establish a tone of voice for businesses who are trying to reach their target demographic?
I think the question is more important to establish your tone, like your specific tone of voice, and express that. And it's because, think of it like this. When you're a kid and you're playing out on the street, maybe this is a millennial thing, but, before the internet.
Man, you have digged us so many times for being young today. That's outrageous.
No, I love it. It's more that I'm digging myself because I realize I'm old. Back in the day, you're playing outside till late and there's no cell phones and stuff. And so you'd hear, for me in particular, you'd hear, Jude, dinner, right? I know, even if I couldn't quite hear the words, my name, I know that's my mum's tone of voice. And so because of that, I know that's got my full attention, and you've got to stop playing cricket, frisbee, whatever it is, and you've got to run home. So I think by having that authentic tone of voice that is your true brand, it helps to get the right ears. So, yeah, I hope that makes sense.
Authenticity is the biggest word in this. I think,
Yeah.
like someone can smell a lie from a mile away.
Yeah.
And if they can't relate with it, they're never going to shop from you or ever relate with, or just do business with you. Yeah, I think. And I like that example of your mum's voice, because you can tell just from like a few words if she's happy, if she's angry, if she's calling you for some important reason. And that if a business can do that as well with their voice, it goes a long way.
How can you tie that emotion into branding?
Tie the emotion of...
Yeah, so as you're describing, like you could understand, like even if you don't hear the words correctly, you can hear that that's your mum, for example, that's calling out to you. Which, by the way, I grew up in a time where there were no mobile phones, so I'll have you know. But like, how can you establish that same emotion so that when you, like, for example, I had a phone call with someone this morning who I haven't spoken to in like 2 years. And as soon as I got on the call, I was like, oh, this is Sam. Before I could even say this is Sam from ShowRealMedia, she's like, oh, Sam from ShowRealMedia, how are you? And it was just kind of that little, I think there's that tone in there. So how can a brand who is listening to this or a business owner take that same language and emotion and use it for good?
Yeah, I think if you have an understanding of what that tone of voice is and the context in which to use that tone of voice as well. So that's another interesting thing that we could talk about, the context of tone of voice later. It perhaps is a combination of certain words that you would use. So the way I would write one thing would be quite different from the way my wife would write. Or if you play on ChatGPT, for example, ChatGPT, why do I know what to do and don't do it? And it's quite funny. But then ask it to say that to you in the tone of voice of, let's say, Dave Chappelle or, some other person. And you will see immediately it's the same content, it's the same message, but said differently. And so those are some little hacks that people could use to help ensure that their tone of voice is on brand.
Let's talk a little bit about context, as you just described.
Yeah, so the context is, if you're going to, let's say you're going to a concert and it's with your friends, the language you might use is different, right? But it is appropriate and probably more correct the way that you speak in that context. So if you don't usually swear much, but then in this group of friends, you drop a couple of F-bombs to sort of fit into your crew. In some ways, that suits that context. But as soon as you go to grandma's house, you might switch it up. Maybe grandma swears more than your mates. I don't know. But there are certain contexts, like when you go to a library or a museum, you would even adopt and change sort of your posture. That applies for tone of voice and even look and feel. There are certain contexts in which you have still the one unified brand. It is an entity, it is a thing, but it might change its clothes depending on where it's being presented or what channel it's on. So the way it might communicate on Snapchat might be quite different to the way it would be communicated on LinkedIn. And there's an appropriateness to that.
I like that. Great response, dude. You've been fantastic today, man. We got to give you that. It's been amazing having you on. We're on to the last segment of this episode, which is solving brand challenges. Maybe you guys might both have a bit more input on this, but the first question that comes in here is sort of what are some common obstacles or challenges businesses encounter while establishing or refining their brand? And I think to close that little bit off is how do you help them overcome that challenge?
Can you say again?
Yeah, you'll have to.
What are some common obstacles or challenges business owners face when establishing or refining their brand? And how do you help them to achieve that and overcome it?
Yeah, so I think some of the common obstacles I've experienced is some people, they believe they already know the answer. They're just hiring you as a pair of hands to do the specific thing. And that can be a huge obstacle, not just for the relationship if you choose to carry on working together, but for that person. They believe, I already know the answer. I just need someone to do it. The challenge with that is if you already knew the answer, then why isn't it done? Sometimes they say, well, it's because I need the pair of hands to do it. And it's hard for them to know whether or not that hypothesis is actually the right thing to do. So I guess at the bottom of it, an obstacle for business owners is they don't treat their hypothesis like a hypothesis, meaning they think they've got the answer rather than it's a guess. So there's a need for a little bit of humility to say, this is my best guess, and with a guess, it could be wrong, but I'm willing to test that. So one of the biggest obstacles is just not having the humility to say, let's be more like an inquisitor or like a scientist who's trying to discover something. You take an action, you do a test, and whatever the answer is the answer. So I think that's a big roadblock for some organizations I've met. Is it written here?
No, it's two different questions.
That's a fantastic answer.
No, but that makes sense.
And how do you handle situations where a brand's messaging or actions come into conflict with its established identity and values?
Oh, well, what's an example?
Well, let me finish that off. Like, what strategies can be employed to mitigate potential damage to the brand's reputation? So I think that ties into what you're talking about with BHP. That if you jaywalk, well, that's an instant dismissal because it comes against what their value is, which is, for example, I don't know if it actually is, but the value might be we do things safely, right? So jaywalking is an immediate potential damage to the brand's reputation. But how do you handle situations where a brand's messaging or actions come into conflict with established identity? I have an example. Let's talk about Bud Light, the recent one where they had, I can't remember their name, but when they hired that influencer to take over their brand page for a little while, and it was just immediate backlash. They've actually recently just signed up after they dropped that. They've just recently signed back up with UFC, and we're pretty sure that Dana White kind of bent them over backwards to get that deal to work and save them out. But I guess that's a great example as how you can do something to damage an already existing reputation. So what would you do in the case that you were working with someone who were starting to implement different tactics that you yourself could see would damage the already existing reputation?
So let's paint the scenario. This brand or organization has already done something that's hurt itself. It's tarnished something. It's ruined the associations people have in their minds about them. This is actually a really passionate thing for me. This is PR, public relations. How do you deal with these challenges? I think in some ways, you could summarize it in 5 words. Be honest, tell the truth. So when I worked at this nonprofit, I was new to the game. I came in and there we did some strategy. And actually, not long after I'd left, that nonprofit is dissolved as gone. And so that kind of hurt me a little bit because I was repeatedly saying for a year and a bit, like, we need to have PR stratagems and how to defend the good work that we're doing because, in life, there's some good things, there's some bad things. So I think the first thing when there's been some damage, whether I don't know how you do the media, whether it's a video from the CEO, I think leadership's going to be hugely important because if you cower behind other things and you can't just be strong as the CEO or the leader and come out and say, hey, we've made some mistakes here, to be honest and tell the truth. Now, if please consult rather your own PR and advisory. If you're in this and you go and say, I did what Jude said, don't come headhunting for me. But what I've observed a few companies do, for example, there's guys that produced a TV series called The Chosen, which kind of follows the life of Jesus. And this guy came under fire by Christians because one of his staff members had a rainbow flag on his laptop and the Christians were all angry about it. Mm-hmm. And this guy comes straight out with a iPhone video and addresses it. He doesn't pander. He tells the truth. He says, these are our values. They've been documented since the beginning. This is how we hire. These are our teams. And if you do not like that was the occurrence, then we're not for you. So for me, I think that the principle of being honest and telling the truth can really help at least get some clarity. So with Bud Light, maybe they should have owned up to the mistakes and they should have,
they're playing the individual more than anything.
They're playing both sides as well. That's when brands get a bit foggy when they stray too far away from their original identity and they try to play into all these new trends and all these different things that they can make quick money off. Like that Bud Light example again, they're obviously going for the LGBTQ community and strays away from their original drinkers, and that's tough. So you have to stick to it to a degree. Yeah.
And when it comes like the leadership component, I think is hugely important for that, because maybe your strategy isn't a particular like, okay, we need to say sorry, let's do it in this type of video. At that high level, it could be like something like, we need to hire and fire. We need to get rid of these people and hire these kind of people, because these human beings who are the leadership actually hold the values that Bud Light used to have. That might be the first most important thing to do. It just really depends, but I think that the leadership is actually hugely important to that, and then just being honest so people can make informed decisions from there.
Yeah, I like that. That's a fantastic answer.
That PR thing was big. Yeah. A lot of private schools also, from my experience as well, they're very silent about just apologizing. They need to be faster with it.
Yeah.
And they're just very.
But also people, sorry to interrupt you, people also see that apologizing and owning up is a weakness. And also they think that that would do more damage than anything. I think if we look back, for example, we're going to use the Bud Light example again, but if they had owned up to it immediately and like apologized for it, I feel like the turnaround would have been better. But because they didn't, they left it for so long. And then when they finally did release an apology, it wasn't an apology. It was blaming the person that they had hired to take care of their brand social. So the person they hired probably made bank off of that, and good for them. That's fantastic. But it kind of furthermore showed the distrust in Bud Light for not fixing that error, right? I think that just completely eradicated all sense of consumer trust.
And that's why I think the leadership comes first and foremost. It's the specific human beings who are the boss to tell them how they should have apologized. There's like a bit of art to communications, if you will, where how should you apologize? And maybe people could reflect in their own personal lives where they're kind of messed up. And sometimes you might apologize, but still have half a resentment and not fully apologize. I think it needs to be sincere.
But anyway, I think this has been a fantastic episode, Mr. Jude. It's an honor to have you on here. It's a little bit of a run and gun episode, name and pun intended. Thank you so much, Jude.
It's awesome.
This has been amazing.
Cheers, lads.
Thank you guys so much for watching the first episode of the Run and Gun podcast by Sam and Aryan. And it's been an amazing episode so far with having Jude on. Hopefully there was a good couple nuggets in there that you could take on and implement into your business. If you enjoyed the podcast, make sure you give us a follow and make sure to subscribe here onto the YouTube channel. And we'll see you all in the next episode of Run and Gun.